Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've managed to get some coffee and are alert and wide awake for this discussion. Our discussion topic now is on partnership as it relates to protection. And we'll use the case study example of South Sudan and the partnership between the ICRC and the South Sudan Red Cross. We're very fortunate to have here today John Lobor, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the South Sudan Red Cross. And in fact, you will be interested to know that John has been with the SSRC for 25 years, and his very first job with the SSRC was as a volunteer in WOW when he was at university in Juba. So for all of you who have been hard at work as volunteers for this Congress for the past several months, you too one day can rise to the level of Deputy Secretary General, like John. Also with us today is Angela Cotroneo, if I pronounced that correctly. Angela is the head of sector for East Africa in the Central Tracing Agency and Protection Division of the ICRC in Geneva. Angela joined the ICRC as a delegate in 2004 and has covered Serbia, Colombia, Kenya, Sudan, and other contexts. We're going to do a couple of different things today. We certainly hope this will be an interactive dialogue rather than purely presentation. And our focus is very much on examining the attributes of the partnership and the collaboration between the ICRC and the South Sudan Red Cross. Particularly, what is it that contributes to a strategic partnership between these two members of the Red Cross movement? In order to contextualize our conversation and give us a bit of insight into the specific context of South Sudan that we're looking at, we're actually going to kick off with a very short video clip which tells a story and provides some context. Angela, do you want to give us just a brief bit of background on this video clip?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Jenny. It's the story of Grace, a South Sudanese girl who had to flee her home because of the conflict, and because of that lost contacts with her mother. And Grace managed to locate her mother, to reestablish contact with her, thanks to the Restoring Family Link services provided by the ICRC and SSRC, the South Sudan Red Cross. And so she decided to join SSRC as a volunteer. So it's a nice story. It's a short video, but we thought it would be a good introduction because, well, already deals with one of the protection activity that ICRC and SSRC jointly implement together in South Sudan, but also because I think it really shows that how strongly SSRC is linked to the community in South Sudan.
My name is Grace Akpon. I'm working at South Sudan Red Cross Volunteers. If you don't know where your relative is, then even you cannot eat well and you cannot sleep well. You always think where he is. Like now, the previous time, my mother was in Bor, but we will not know whether she is alive or she was not alive. So I tried to call my mother, and I heard that she is alive and she is in Bor. So I was very glad about what has happened to me. And I told my father that I have got my mother and my mother is alive. Then he told me that, Grace, if she is alive like that, let me talk to her. Let me hear her voice. So I came here with him and he heard my mother's voice. And he was very happy and all the children were very happy. We, the volunteers of South Sudan Red Cross, we have been told to restore the family links of South Sudan, those who have run to the foreign countries and those who are here. Since this fighting has occurred in both towns, there are many people who have lost their relatives, friends, and they don't know where they are. We have brought what we call phone calls and Red Cross messages.
Hello.
When you have your first son and he is in Uganda, Kenya, and you know they never phone, then you can simply bring it here, then we call where he is, and then you hear his or her voice. So a lot of people we have found here in Goliath, they have met the...
I think we lost our internet connection.
It was the very last point.
At the very last point. What is the very last point, Angela?
No, well, I mean, it was really the very, it was really the very, very last part of the video. It was almost the end, in fact. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So I think we've seen most of it.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. So let's switch over now and hear from John, who's going to set the stage for us in terms of the context in South Sudan and the work of the SSRC.
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My presentation will provide the stage on the context in South Sudan. The map you see is actually the network of, that's the map of South Sudan, but it also shows you the network of the South Sudan Red Cross within the country. The second map, you can see it is highlighted in red, orange, and green. The red area, this is where we have an active conflict ongoing within the country. The orange area, this is an area where there's a lot of communal violence that is related to cattle wrestling, competition over grazing area and resources. And the green area, this is the part of South Sudan which is not affected by the conflict directly. But of course, there are people that have been displaced from the red zone into either the orange area or the green area. And in South Sudan, we have 10 states as shown on the map. The information you see shows the neighboring countries that surrounds South Sudan. We have Kenya to the east, Uganda to the south, DRC to the southwest, Sudan to the north. We have Central African Republic to the west. So those are neighboring countries within the region, and then Ethiopia to the east. These are countries that are bordering South Sudan. And then, of course, you have the Human Development Index information, which you can see. I hope you can read it very clearly on the screen.
If you prefer to stand up so you can see it better, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah, you can see the Human Development Index. Can you give me the scroller? And then I'll tell you briefly about the history of South Sudan Red Cross, where we have actually come from. You know that Sudan, before we became independent, was a colony of the British Red Cross. And we existed as part of the British Red Cross between 1923 to 1955. And from 1956, when Sudan became independent, then the Sudanese Red Crescent Society was established, and that was the period from 1956 to July 2011. And of course, when South Sudan became an independent entity after the referendum in 2011, then it resulted into the birth of the South Sudan Red Cross, which has been recognized by an act of parliament. That's the Red Cross law of South Sudan, recognizing the South Sudan Red Cross as a national humanitarian organization that is able to operate throughout the entire territory of the Republic of South Sudan and recruit its members across the entire country, regardless of their ethnic background, religion, and diversity. In June 2012, we were recognized as a member of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent, and November 2013, we became a member of the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. In terms of structure, we have 10 branch states that cover the entire geographical area of the country. We have about 167 employed staff, 2,000 members, and 4,000 volunteers. You know that this is still a new national society, And we are striving very hard to increase this number on a daily basis. In terms of departments, we have the Disaster Management Department in the National Society. We have the Department of Health and Care, which mainly deals with the emergency health, psychosocial support, community health, and first aid. And then we have the organizational development, and then the support services. The humanitarian situation in South Sudan. Probably a lot of you have read it in the media. And just to be very brief on that is that on December 13th, conflict broke out in Juba, which is the capital of South Sudan. And this conflict later spread to the area which was shown in the map as red. And as a result of that war, we now have about 1.4 million people that have been displaced internally in country. And we have 452,900 refugees that are living across the neighboring countries, Kenya, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Uganda. The bulk of this population have been displaced there as refugees. In addition to that, we have 96,800 internal displaced people that are living in UN-protected sites. This is simply because they are under a threat of violence or under a threat of attack, and they have sought refugees in these UN-protected sites where they are staying up to this point in time. And these UN protection sites are covering the entire country. As a result of the conflict, livelihood has been affected. Probably most of you who may be following the political developments in South Sudan, you know that there's an engagement in terms of trying to bring peace in country. There are ceasefire agreements that have been signed in order to provide humanitarian access. But what we see is that actually these agreements are not being respected, and there's continuous violation of these agreements, which is of course causing a lot of humanitarian displacement and so on. The economy, you know, in any country when fighting erupts, the economy is also disrupted. That means it will not function well. And of course, if you don't have a well-functioning economy, it means a lot of people are being driven below the poverty line, and their means of survival and livelihood is directly affected. There are ongoing peace negotiations, but there are challenges because the different fighting groups have got their own interests. But also those brokering the peace agreements, like the ICRC members, they are, I would say, like both players and referees at the same time, and this makes the situation very complex. Can you move to the next slide? What has South Sudan Red Cross been able to respond in terms of this crisis? We have been able to evacuate people that are wounded, particularly civilians and some militaries, particularly in terms of Malakal and Bentiu. We have been also able to transport a case in Bentiu whereby a specific ethnic group felt they were under threat of being attacked, and the local branch of the Red Cross was able to organize transport and move them from their residential areas into the UN protection sites, where most of them up to this time are living just to seek protection out of fear of being attacked. We have been conducting also distributions of food items together with our colleagues from the ICRC, particularly in areas that where there's active physical fighting taking place as shown on the red map. And in other areas where fighting is not taking place, like in the orange or green area, we are working with our other international partners within the Red Cross movement, the International Federation, and the other participating national societies that are working with us in South Sudan. Move to the next slide. What are the challenges that we face in our day-to-day action and activities? South Sudan, of course, is a disaster-prone country. We have flooding, which occurs always annually. And for last year, the last 2 years, out of the 10 states, about 7 out of 10 were actually affected by flooding within the country. We also had an outbreak of cholera that was this year, which killed quite a number of people, and so many people were affected as a result of that outbreak of cholera. We have a disease which is known as Kalaza in the specific areas of Unity State and Jongole, which has affected a lot of people, and it is projected that if people do not have access to health facilities, then we are likely to see the number of people that are affected by this rising. Malaria, watery diarrhea diseases is also a problem, particularly during this time of the year, because this is the rain season when we have a lot of rains in the country. And so this is another challenge. And we have major road accidents that are also happening and taking a toll on people. Other challenges, of course, that are impending on our humanitarian action is security related. There's limited access to some of the population when the security situation, of course, becomes very dangerous. There are also a mixed picture in terms of the respect of the Red Cross emblem. We have volunteers and staff who either because of their ethnic background cannot be able to move from one operational area to another, and that is a challenge that we have to deal with. There are challenges in terms of communications. We have, particularly in the orange area that we show in the map, intercommunal violence that is related to cattle wrestling, competition over grazing area. But this is not linked to the war, but this has been something that has been there for time immemorial in South Sudanese. And this is particularly common in the cattle keeping communities. We also have challenges, particularly in urban areas, in dealing with the armed robbery and criminality, which is also on the increase within the country. So these are challenges that directly affect not us as Red Cross only, but all humanitarian actors that are working in South Sudan. Can you move to the next slide? Partners that we are working with, we have, these are only movement Red Cross partners that are working with us in South Sudan. We have 13 partners that are working with us in South Sudan as the Red Cross, providing humanitarian assistance, either development or humanitarian assistance in South Sudan. Next slide. We also have, when the crisis happened, we had, of course, to call our neighbors, the Kenya Red Cross, to come and support us in order to increase our capacity in terms of the response. And I think this is the added advantage of within the Red Cross movement, that if you will have a national society or a local Red Cross somewhere, and a crisis happens, you can always rely on the universal network of the Red Cross to come and give you support. If I give you a recent example, is that when we had the outbreak of the cholera in country, through the International Federation, we had to invite people who are the experts in terms of deployment. And we had people even from Germany that went as part of the ERU to South Sudan to come and support us in addressing some of these issues. So I think this is a comparative advantage that we have as a Red Cross, because as you know, the Red Cross is a universal movement where each society can help. They have solidarity with one another. They can help one another whenever another Red Cross organization would like to have support. So that's why you see a lot of these partners of the Red Cross in South Sudan. They are there to support us, and through their support, we are able to address some of the humanitarian issues that are affecting our population in South Sudan. With this, I think this gives you an overview of a brief overview of the humanitarian situation in South Sudan. And thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John. And now let's hand over to Angela.
Thank you, Jenny. So this is going to be a brief overview of ICRC operations in South Sudan with a special focus on protection activities. And I will hopefully managed to already bring forward some observations on the partnership that we have with the SSRC. The ICRC in South Sudan has been working very hard since the beginning of the conflict in order to address the needs of those displaced and affected by the violence. This within the framework of our humanitarian mandate and according to the principles of neutrality, impartiality, and independence. The ICRC has been put in place a multidisciplinary response across the 10 states of South Sudan and implemented directly by ICRC staff, 150 international staff, and some more than 600 resident staff. We have been providing assistance to the conflict-affected community, particularly to the internally displaced, food, essential household items, improved access to water and sanitation, livelihood support programs such as cattle vaccination and a distribution of seeds and tools. Last but not least, surgical care and first aid for weapon-wounded patients. And we have also been seeking to enhance protection for the lives and dignity of civilians and all those who don't take any longer part in the hostilities. As John said, we have been working in partnership with the South Sudan Red Cross, the SSRC. They are our primary operational partner in South Sudan, and as such, they are closely involved and supports ICRC in the implementation of assistance activities that I have just mentioned, as well as in the provision of restoring family link service, as we saw in the video that we saw at the beginning. This cooperation allows ICRC to count on a large network of very committed staff and volunteers, South Sudanese staff and volunteers who are present across the country, share the same principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence, and also bring their insight of the local context, the knowledge of the community, which makes that they really help contribute to strengthen ICRC field anchorage and the proximity to the affected people. John already mentioned that ICRC and SSRC response is complemented by activities of the International Federation and other national societies. The challenge is, providing an adequate humanitarian response in South Sudan is extremely challenging. John already mentioned the magnitude of the needs. The humanitarian needs are just immense, and with all the numbers of displaced persons and also the refugees across the borders. In spite of the cessation of hostilities and the recommitment that were signed since January, as already mentioned by John, the clashes continue. So this means that displacement also and civilian casualties continues. And abuses against civilians also continue to be reported, and protection concerns continue to affect the internally displaced. So in the face of this situation, it becomes very important to set priorities, not only based on most urgent needs, but also on where and how the ICRC can have added value, as well as to coordinate with other humanitarian actors in the best interest of the victims. Reaching out to affected populations is also a big challenge, given the large scale of the affected areas and the poor infrastructures of the country. And obviously, the rainy season further increased the difficulties of reaching the populations, especially those that are displaced in very remote areas far from any service, which obviously requires a lot of capacity to adapt the logistical means and setup in order to be able to support the operations. And last but not least, security remains volatile. Clashes still go on, and actually hostilities might even increase when the red season is over, if the peace negotiations don't bring concrete progress. And being in the wrong place at wrong time is not the only risk associated with hostilities. Further threats in South Sudan are represented by the fact that there is lack of discipline, weak chain of command and control of armed actors, this entailing then the risk of being threatened, being attacked, even if you obtain security guarantees for your activities beforehand. In the first months of the conflict, the ICRC and SSRC, as many other organizations, had to evacuate teams from the area, the town, Bentiu, Bor, Malakal, they were most affected by the hostilities. And we also experienced looting of premises, looting of vehicles and equipment. Obviously, security risks are for both the ICRC and SSRC, but I think I would like to stress that local staff is particularly vulnerable to this because they're more vulnerable to pressure and to threats by armed actors. And this is even more valid in a context like South Sudan, where the conflict has a very strong ethnic dimension, and local staff can be more easily perceived as associated or supporting one party to the conflict and being targeted based on the ethnic affiliation. So with this in mind, we try to limit the involvement of our same local staff and SSRC staff and volunteers in the implementation of particularly sensitive protection activities, such as visit to places of detention and the dialogue that we maintain with parties to the conflict on respect for civilian population, which are activities that are dealt with by ICRC international staff. And mitigating factors, what we do is also trying to dialogue continuously with the communities, with the tribal leaders to better understand the situation and network with the parties to the conflict, and communication, dissemination on ICRC and SSRC role and mandate, our principles and modalities in order to increase our acceptance. Concerning protection, since the beginning of the conflict, the ICRC has been very concerned about reports of high number of serious violations of IHL affecting civilians and the wounded and sick. Main pattern of abuses are publicly known and include direct targeting of civilians, often along ethnic lines, sexual violence, attacks against healthcare personnel and facilities, the use and recruitment of children by armed actors. Another concern is family separation, as we saw in Gray's video, that is associated to the large displacement within South Sudan and across borders. And a concern also is the situation of people in detention. Persons deprived of liberty may now be more at risk because of their ethnicity. Their restoring family link needs also increased for the people in detention. And especially in the first month of the conflict, the food supplies for the detainees were disrupted, and there continues to be also concerns in terms of drug supplies and healthcare services. ICRC protection response is articulated in different components. First of all, we maintain a confidential dialogue with parties to the conflict on patterns of abuses that we have identified and key humanitarian concerns affecting those who do not or no longer take part in the hostilities. We, in meetings, with written reports, we remind parties to the conflict about their responsibility to respect IHL, international humanitarian law, and also the responsibilities for commanders to enforce discipline, to set clear orders, abiding with IHL, and sanctions violations when they occur. This is also reinforced by what we call prevention activities, in particular training sessions that we conduct at all levels with armed forces, armed groups, tribal militia, in order to enforce knowledge of IHL. and also because we try to have an integrated approach of protection activities and assistance activities. This means that we are making continuous efforts to find ways on how to assist, to support the communities in enforcing the self-protection strategies, and to have protection considerations injected and mainstreamed in our assistance activities. And in this regard, in fact, the contributions that local staff and SSRC staff and volunteers that work with us in hospitals, at distribution points, and with IDPs can be very important, because with the local knowledge and knowledge of the community, they can help us better understand the situation and the protection concerns, and also the priorities of the communities. Protection activities also, on behalf of the civilians and the wounded and sick, include interventions with the authorities in charge concerning respect for the medical mission, ad hoc transfers of people at high risk to places that are safer, and also whenever possible an adequate referral of victims of abuse, including victims of sexual violence, to structure for treatment and assistance. The second component is what we've seen is the restoring family link services. Together with the SSRCs, we have been working to restore contact between family members separated by the conflict. We've done this, as we saw in the video, we've been doing this with the traditional Red Cross messages, but especially and mainly with phone services that are facilitated in IDP camps and also in UNMISS protection of civilian areas. And we have built the capacity of the SSRC's volunteers to deliver these services. And in fact, now they are also carrying it autonomously in some areas, like, for example, in Juba. And RFL services also include helping reunite children with their families. So we register and follow up on unaccompanied and vulnerable separated children. We try to locate their families, and when in their best interest, to reunify them with their families. We do this in coordination with the UN agencies and child protection actors in Juba, especially when both the child and the families are in South Sudan. When either of them is elsewhere, is abroad, then it's ICRC and SSRC that take the lead, and we proceed thanks also to the help of the RFL teams of ICRC and other national societies in the neighboring countries. And finally, I mentioned also visits to places of detention. This includes also visits to persons that are detained in relation to the conflict. Our ICRC delegates monitor treatment and conditions of detention. We register and follow up individually detainees that might have protection concerns. And we try to support the authorities in adhering to international standards and responding to the emergency. So we provide those emergency assistance when necessary. So I think this is it, and I hope that you have now some more information concerning ICRC operation and the partnership with SSRC.
Thank you, both Angela and John. So to kick us off, I mean, I have to say both of you spoke of the strategic benefits of the partnership in terms of the Red Cross network, the network of the Red Cross movement. And John, you described this in terms of the solidarity of the network and the fact that it gives you access to expertise and backup resources at certain moments in time. For example, you described earlier in response to a cholera crisis, and then when the situation deteriorated in December of last year. At the same time, and Angela, you described it very much in terms of access to local knowledge and local expertise to support ICRC operations. But I can't help but note that managing 13 partnerships sounds quite intense. It's intense enough to manage one partnership, and ensure that that's a productive and good relationship, let alone 13 partnerships at a time. Also, in our earlier conversation, you noted, John, that ICRC national staff outnumbers SSRC staff by a factor of 5. What was it? 5 to 1. So that suggests an additional challenge when it comes to actually managing that relationship. So how do you manage such a vast network of partnerships in a context where you're having to respond to a highly complex crisis?
Okay. What I can say is, as I've said earlier, is that, first of all, the Red Cross is a universal movement whereby the different members within the movement are always in solidarity with each other in the event of a crisis or no crisis. And of course, it is if somebody looks at, say, okay, how are you able to manage all these 13 partners in South Sudan with all these crises? As a movement that is working in South Sudan, we have mechanisms that have been set up of how we coordinate our humanitarian action as a Red Cross movement within the country. First of all, what makes it easier is that we are all one family. We come from a movement that believes in the same principles, the principles of humanity, neutrality, independence, and impartiality. And each partner that comes in is coming with the aim that they are coming there to support the national society in order to be able to provide humanitarian services. So what is in South Sudan as a coordination mechanism for all of us to work better is that we have 3 levels of coordination mechanisms that have been put up in the country. One is what we call the platform meeting, that is a coordination mechanisms, whereby we have the leadership of the national society, that's the Secretary General, the Deputy Secretary General, we have the head of delegation of the ICRC, and the head of the International Federation. We have what we call a platform meeting. And this platform meeting takes place once every month. And what we discuss in the platform meeting are mainly policy and the strategic issues concerning the Red Cross as a whole in the country. Then the second layer of coordination is what we call the movement operational coordination mechanisms. And in these movement operational coordination mechanisms, all the 13 partners that you saw on my presentation have a meeting twice every week to share information, to discuss operational successes, to discuss operational challenges, and how best we can be able to work together. And then the third layer of coordination mechanism is we have sectoral technical committees. For example, we have the DM, the health, WhatsApp, and others. These ones meet also twice a month, and they discuss issues concerning the different sectors. And if there are issues that they cannot resolve at that level, it comes up to the movement operational coordination level. And if they are not resolved there, then they go higher up. So the flow of information is from top to down and then from bottom up as well. And this ensures that we are seen as one movement in the country that is able to respond to the needs of the people. For ICRC in the country, of course, it has a specific mandate that in areas that are affected by the conflict, as you saw in the red map, the ICRC takes a lead in the coordinating the humanitarian activities in those areas. And in areas that we saw as green, the National Society, together with the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, takes the lead in the coordination of the humanitarian activities in those areas. And for us as South Sudan Red Cross, of course, we are working across the entire country. We don't have a divide between those working in the conflict area and non-conflict area. So we are on both sides of the situation, whether in conflict or non-conflict situation. And that's how we manage the coordination and partnerships. That does not mean we also do not engage with other actors. I think she did mention that we have coordination with what we call the NGO Forum, which also have got clusters. And we are also participants in those cluster meetings, but as observers, but not, and not as members, due to the fact that the Red Cross and the Red Crescent is an independent entity of its own, and we only go there to share information. Possibly my colleague Angela will be able to complement what I've said.
In fact, I think you described it pretty well. Yeah, indeed, coordination is facilitated by the fact that there are mechanisms for that we are family, as John said, because we do share the same principles, and the fact that there is this agreed division of responsibility whereby when it's a situation of armed conflict, it's the ICRC who takes the lead in activities. So, yeah, for others, it would be the International Federation.
So I wonder, actually, Angela, whether you can take some of your comments a little bit further. One of the things that John noted is that there is, in fact, mixed respect for the emblem. And certainly there's the challenge associated with the intensely polarized character and the ethnic dimension of the conflict in South Sudan. What are some of the challenges then that play out in your relationship with SSRC, and how do you manage them?
As I mentioned before, there are security challenges, and in a polarized context like South Sudan, and with a conflict with such a strong ethnic dimension, there is obviously always the risk of misperception. There is also suspicion on the part of armed actors concerning those who may be working in the area. So it becomes extremely important to work in order to increase acceptance through networking and through communication and dissemination with all the different stakeholders and contacts with the communities and the tribal leaders. Definitely, as I said, the risks are especially there for local staff, because, we said that the strength of SSRC is obviously the fact that they are the community, and in this they really contribute a lot in our proximity to the victims and outreach to the population, because they are present across the countries and have this large network of volunteers. But at the same time, the fact of being from the community expose them to increased risk of being exposed to threats, or also to pressure from the community themselves for obtaining assistance, for example. So you need to manage these, and in a way of trying to not to expose too much the local staff and SSRC staff in sensitive activities. So whenever they cannot go, then it's ICRC and it's ICRC delegate that step in and then implement the activities.
Okay, good. Thank you. Let's open it up to the floor. Anyone like to jump in with questions? I think we'll start with about 3 and see how we go. I see one hand over there, another hand over here, and then a gentleman in what I think is a purple shirt right there. Yes, you.
Thank you for the speakers. I'd like to ask a question. There is a long history of humanitarian involvement in South Sudan. Throughout the conflict, dating back to, I don't know, the 60s maybe. And one experience is the consolidation of humanitarian aid in what was called Operation Lifeline Sudan. And in that context, there were accusations made to humanitarian actors of, in a sense, inadvertently extending the conflict by providing support to, directly or indirectly, to armed actors, or allowing armed actors to operate while they support the local population. What are the lessons you've drawn from Operation Lifeline Sudan?
Okay. Let's take a couple more questions, and then we'll ask you to respond. Let's see. The hand over there. Yes, the gentleman with his hand poking up in the air. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. John, for your presentation. We're talking about the role of local partners in protection. I'm interested to hear a bit more if the International Conference for the Great Lakes region, which is a regional organization, also plays a role in trying to address humanitarian issues, because the ICGLR has actually a program of action that also addresses humanitarian and social issues. So I'm just wondering if the ICGLR plays a role in that regard. And if it plays a role, then what is the nature of the coordination or collaboration between the ICGLR and your program? Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat the name of the organization, please?
International Conference for the Great Lakes region.
Got it. Okay, one last question over here. Yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lobor, I would like to direct one question to you and after one question to the representative of the ICRC. I heard that protection activities you can only do, or you do only, if you act impartially, neutral, and independent. And now you described that you have a heavy ethnic conflict in Sudan. And I ask me if this did not repercute also within your organization, and how did you handle it? If there were this tension within the organization, how you handled to become or to defend your stand in the conflict as an impartial and neutral organization, because the most important thing is you have to perceive from the two sides as impartial and neutral to act and also to protect people. Were you really able to protect people in the different areas you work there and to protect the people affected by violence in the two areas? That is one question. The second question to the ICRC. I understood that the whole framework of the ICRC was a division between ICRC and the Federation of the National Organizations. That the ICRC plays a special role in conflicts, yes? Nevertheless, you work together with national organizations also in conflict. Nowadays, in a lot of countries, let's say the National Red Cross organization, at least the leadership, has a strong link to the government. That is obvious in various countries. And now you have internal conflict in this country where the government is one side of the conflict party. How you deal in this situation in cooperation with your local Red Cross organization? As you speak about, for example, Syria, to speak about Pakistan, how you handle this, that the local organization maintains the same principles as you would like to do. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think that gives us a lot to start with. John, do you want to go ahead? So the first question was about the long history of humanitarian involvement in South Sudan, and questions about whether humanitarian actors unintentionally and directly or indirectly contributed to the protracted character of the conflict, whether humanitarian actors helped to prolong the conflict, potentially due to benefits experienced by the parties during Operation Lifeline Sudan, for example.
Well, I really cannot make a comment on the activities and Operation Lifeline Sudan, because we, by then, before South Sudan became independent, we are part of the Sudanese Red Crescent Society. And we are not part of the Operation Lifeline Sudan. Operation Lifeline Sudan was mainly run and managed by the UN, and we were not part of that operation. So I really cannot make a judgment and a comment on that. the second question.
The other questions concerned, is there a humanitarian role for the international conference of the Great Lakes region, and do you coordinate with them? The other questions concerned, is it possible to defend a perception of impartiality given the ethnic character of the conflict? And for ICRC concerning the relationship between the national society and the government and how you manage that given the character of the conflict in South Sudan.
Okay, what I can say is that first of all I would like to make some corrections here. The conflict, of course, it is said is polarized, and it's not really ethnic as people may want to see. It is this conflict broke out as a political party that is responsible in running the politics in South Sudan. There was a disagreement within the party, which actually resulted into the conflict breaking out. And in the initial stages, of course, it looked as based on ethnic line, but at the moment, I think it is now a question of the different political interests. So you find that there are people across South Sudan who are both on the opposition, and there are those that are within the government. So the ethnic dimension is not really strong at this point in time, because it's more of politicians either on both sides, either on the government or on the opposition sides, that are making this fight to go on. So the issue of ethnicity is not so strong as people would like to perceive. Of course, for us as South Sudan Red Cross, the issue, as I mentioned, that is a mixed reaction in terms of the respect to the emblem. In some situations, we have places where the emblem of the Red Cross has been respected. For example, if I take recently, whereby in one of the locations, an armed person fired at the militaries and he killed one military person. The militaries, of course, had to respond with impunity, and a lot of people took refuge in one of our local Red Cross office. And the military were not able to go in, and this clearly shows that they had the respect for the Red Cross in that particular case. But in the red area, as I showed in the map, when the conflict broke out, the local Red Cross branches in those areas were subjected to looting, and property were taken and destroyed. It was not only for the Red Cross, but it was a generalized problem for all humanitarian actors there. So that was a general problem, but not really a specific target to the Red Cross. And our members and staff and volunteers, as you said, are recruited throughout the entire country. So that means the composition of our staff and volunteers as a member reflects the general population of the country. But in terms of operations, sometimes, and this happens everywhere, there's a problem of moving a particular staff from one area to another due to his identity in terms of his ethnic background and so on. And therefore, if we have this kind of situation, to minimize the risk, then we deploy people in such operational area, people that are acceptable in that situation. And all our action that we try to do, we try to demonstrate our impartiality and our neutrality in whatever action that we undertake. And that's why when you saw the map showing the network of the national society, it showed that we are able to act on both sides of the conflict. But of course, it doesn't mean that there's no pressure, as my colleague has said from the ICRC, that is sometimes put on our local volunteers or local staff in the areas where they are working. And of course, one of the advantages here we have is that in terms of propagation of the IHL and so on, we as the national society mainly deal with the civilian populations and civilian authorities. And the ICRC engages with the different armed groups. So in the process of engaging with different armed groups. Then they also, in the process, profile the national society, that is the South Sudan Red Cross. And in this process, this becomes a strategic advantage for both of us working together in terms of how one partner can be able to talk on behalf of the others if that partner does not have specific access to a specific place. And for us to be seen as neutral and impartial, this is not only to be demonstrated in our place of work, but even when we are at our homes or where we are having other social occasions, that means you have to abide by the principles of the movement wherever you are, whether in work or in a place of work, because we are conscious that probably somebody somewhere is really following you and try to see whether you really demonstrate that you are really impartial and neutral in whatever you are doing when you are doing your work. And that's how we are able to minimize some of the risks that probably would affect our colleagues. And what was the last question?
There was a question on the International Conference of the Great Lakes region, whether you're familiar with that.
I think this is the first time I have heard about this organization, and I cannot make any comment on that.
Okay. Angela.
I just would like to expand on what John already said, and I think it can be the answer to both the first and the second question concerning the assistance and how this can be perceived, and the protection protecting people in an environment that is polarized and with a strong ethnic dimension. It's really key for both the local actors and so the national society and the international organization, the ICRC, to establish and to strive and to maintain a neutral posture and an impartial humanitarian response in South Sudan. And this means that we try to do this, and through engaging and providing assistance and services on a need assessment basis. That's what impartiality means. And we try also to balance interventions. So assistance and services are provided in part on the countries that are still controlled by the government, but also those under the opposition forces. And then obviously, from us, it becomes a key to be transparent and with all parties to the conflict, to constantly dialogue with them. And another element is the discreet and confidential approach that we use in addressing protection issues. So keeping a neutral position at all levels is obviously key, and this is all the more so in terms of public communication. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There's one area where I think we should perhaps dig a little bit deeper, and that is the relationship between national societies and the government. And I wonder whether, John, in your experience, are there instances where the government may have certain expectations of the national society, and you're faced with a situation of, having to figure out, how best to respond in light of, potentially inappropriate or problematic expectations coming from the government, in order to be able to adhere to the methods and the approaches that you described?
Yeah, the expectations of government, population, partners on the South Sudan Red Cross is considerably very high in terms of supporting the people that are affected by crisis, whether man-made or natural. And what we have to do is to engage with, for example, on the government, to engage and tell them exactly what our mandate is, what we can be able to do, and what we cannot be able to do. And this, we have to make it as a very clear and specific message to the government authorities. For example, if we take the example of when the conflict broke out in December 2013, and it broke out in Juba. And a lot of organization and international staff from NGOs, they all fled and left the country. It was only ICRC, the South Sudan Red Cross, and maybe some UN agencies that were left. And we had a population of almost 300,000 people that had to cross within a period of 1 week from Bor across the River Nile into Awerial, which is now one of the biggest IDP camps in South Sudan. And the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs had to call us and say, we have a crisis before us. There's nobody that's able to respond. And we know that South Sudan Red Cross and its partner and the ICRC at this point in time will be a reliable partner that will really be able to address this situation. So how can you help us in this situation? Of course, we said, yes, this is a crisis that's within our mandate, that we are able to respond, but taking into consideration the volatile security situations, we need to make, first of all, an assessment and get security guarantees that when we deploy people to go into these areas, at least no security problems would be encountered. Obstructions, for example, people being harassed or injured and so on. And it took us 1 week of engagement with not only the people in the ministry, but also the relevant military and security authorities. Until we got the guarantees, then after that, we are able to send a team on the ground that was able to make an assessment, do the distributions in terms of food, water, shelter materials. And after a period of about 3 weeks, then other actors gradually became to come in. So it means we really have to have a transparent and open dialogue with the concerned parties if we would like to have access, particularly in areas that are seriously affected by conflict. And that's how we engage with the authorities. But the expectation and the demands are high, but we also have to be realistic and tell them that within our means, this is what we can be able to do, and without the means, we cannot be able to do A, B, C, and D. And that's the engagement that we have to do with the concerned different people and the authorities.
Yeah.
I don't know if my colleague can complement that.
Perhaps what I would like to add is that, indeed, the national society is naturally an auxiliary to the government, but at the same time, you have the principles of independence and neutrality that are the principles that all members of the movement obey with, and then you have the universality also, which means that, as we said, inside the national society, for example, in South Sudan, you have people that represent all communities, so they're all from all ethnicities. So this is also important to stress and to maintain, to be the national society in one in the country. But in this regard, I think it's concerning the possible stress and in this position of the national society. This is probably also what can one of the advantages that the partnership with the ICRC can bring, in the sense that we as an international organization, and it deals with both parties to the conflict, etc., can help the national society to reinforce the image of the movement as a neutral, impartial, independent humanitarian actor.
Okay, good, thank you. Let's go for another round. Last time I called on all men, so this time I'm looking for all women. Let's see, raising their hands, and now the men feel like they've not been called on. Okay, anyone who would like to ask a question? I have one on the top row, a gentleman here in the blue shirt, in the blue blazer, and a gentleman with the black shirt.
So, hello, thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question in terms of that might broaden up the issue of local partners a bit. In the presentation of the ICRC, there was a comment on protection issues, which said that you are searching for ways to support communities in reducing exposure and to enhance their self-protection strategies. Do you see a problem there in terms of neutrality, or your perception that how you're perceived as neutral, and maybe as well the danger of the confidentiality of your dialogue if you start discussing self-protection strategies with the community? And on top of this, is an international organization like the ICRC able to protect, not protect now in the sense of protection activities, but to actually give security to these communities when they come under danger? Because you try to enhance their self-protection strategies, they might use them, these self-protection strategies, and then they might come under danger. And then are you able to respond to this, or do you actually create a danger for them? And that might be a question that John might be able to answer with his, as being part of a local community that lives in an environment like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good questions. Yes.
I actually was going to ask a very similar question. I was very surprised to hear the Red Cross being involved so deeply in security sector reform, as it sounds. So I wonder if you could maybe give us a positive and a negative example of your dialogue and training of security or armed actors. You mentioned that you, for example, train them in international humanitarian law. I'd like to ask if you think that's adequate in every context in South Sudan. And also, who are you engaging? Which actors can you actually reach? Which actors don't listen to you no matter what you do with them? And which actors maybe even profit from the engagement of the Red Cross with them? Thank you.
Thank you. And the gentleman in the black shirt.
Tancred Emmers of Germany. My question is, at the moment there is sort of a little bit of a calm period in South Sudan, but a lot of people think that once the rainy season comes to an end, that fighting will come back, and that, of course, is probably the biggest trigger for new IDP movements and more suffering. So you, as experts on the ground widely in South Sudan, what factors do you see sort of giving a reason that stabilization can continue, or on the other hand, what factors do you see that speak for more conflict coming back after the rainy season? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would you like me to recap the questions? So the first concerned ICRC's work to support a community-level protection strategies, and whether indeed this may compromise your dialogue with the parties. Does it affect confidentiality of your dialogue? And what are the implications for the security of the population? And indeed, are there situations where the security of the population may be negatively affected or compromised? Secondly, there was a question around the involvement in security sector reform, and the person asking the question was surprised at the nature of dialogue with the parties to conflict. Could this please be described further in terms of who this dialogue is with? And, is the IHL training that is given sufficient? Thirdly, what are the factors affecting stability in South Sudan? Certainly there are significant humanitarian implications associated with a deterioration and a return to fighting. So what do you foresee going forward?
So I'll take the first question. So supporting protection strategies of the community, compromise dialogue. Well, no, rather than compromising dialogue with the different parties to the conflict, it complements the dialogue in terms of strategy of ICRC to try to enhance as much as possible the protection of the affected communities. Let me explain better. So from one side, what we do is engaging with armed forces, armed groups, with all parties to the conflict, trying to bring in a discreet and confidential way up the concerns, the protection concerns of the population, and discuss alleged violations that have been committed, and as I said, trying to discuss with them on ways to improve respect for IHL, and then so ultimately respect for the civilians, their property, their life and dignity. So this is one side, but on the other side, we also engage in a confidential dialogue with the community. We are with them, in contact with them, and this is also where having local staff ourselves and having the possibility to count on ICRC volunteers is definitely an advantage in order to dialogue with their communities and understand, first of all, from them how they see their situation, what are their protection concerns, and where they see their priority. And in this dialogue with their communities, we try also to identify, and this is what we call community-based protection, and this is what I was referring to in my presentation. We try to identify whether there are already coping mechanisms that the communities can put in place in order to try to reduce their vulnerability to certain risk, and see whether through simple maybe assistance intervention we can further help them to reinforce these coping mechanisms in order to try to see whether they're, as a way to reduce further their vulnerability. So I see it not as a compromise, also because in our dialogue with the parties to the conflict, we obviously are very clear concerning explaining to them what our activities is about, what our contacts with the population are. So we are transparent about what we are doing, both with the armed actors and with the community. So not really a compromising of the dialogue, but rather complement to the dialogue in order to try to enhance the protection of the communities. Concerning security and the dialogue that we have with the armed groups, but maybe you wanted to add something else. Okay. So our dialogue, it's,
Angela, hold the mic.
Oh, sorry. We try to maintain a constructive exchange with the parties of the conflict. The discreet and confidential approach that we follow helps in order to build trust and try to be constructive in identifying what are the shortcomings and the problems that may lead to a lack of proper respect for international humanitarian law, and then ultimately to abuses that are committing against civilians, against the wounded and sick, against those that should be protected and respected. This is also complemented and supported by the dissemination or session on IHL, the training that we conduct with all the different parties. You were asking me who we are able to reach in these communication activities, in these prevention activities. Well, it's, as I said, it's the armed forces, it's also armed groups, and it's also other weapon bearers like tribal militias, such as, for example, the White Army. And what we try to do is to really use this other type of contact that we have with the different parties in order to support our protection dialogue and to emphasize the messages, key messages that do reflect the protection concerns that we identify in the field. So sexual violence, healthcare in danger, so the necessity to respect the medical mission, and which allows us to also to discuss ways to improve respect of IHL in a less maybe sometimes tensed setting than a bilateral meeting where we bring on the table specific incidents that affected the population. And it's very interesting also to try to, as an exercise, to try to use arguments as well as ways to reach out to the armed groups, to the tribal militia, in order to incorporate also the local culture in the way that we try to provide the messages. And this ultimately, in order to, as I said, to try to enhance the dialogue, and through this to make progress in a way towards a way of improving respect for IHL and then improving respect for the population.
Yeah, okay. There was a question asked about the security sector reform. What we know is that the army in South Sudan, if you look at the history, is mainly a guerrilla army. That after the agreement, they become the national army of the country, and this guerrilla army has had a mix of people, militias that were fighting on the side of Khartoum. They became integrated into the army. We have other local militias, including the SPLA itself. And I know that there has been an agenda supported by the international community, particularly the US government and the other Western countries, to ensure that the army is professionalized. And that means some people will be demobilized, and then also try to get in new recruits into the army, train them, professionalize them, so that they become like a professional army. And that agenda has been there, but unfortunately with the outbreak of the conflict in December, I think that has been put to a halt. And that means we hope that peace will be achieved soon, so that this agenda again can be revisited and the process will continue. Of course, it is not going to be an easy process, because we are talking, I don't know what is the size of the army, a very huge number of army, and to demobilize most of them, this means you have to have packages in place that will be provided to them so that they can be able to go and resettle and start a new life, which is not military but a civilian life, and maybe they become farmers or do other things for their survival and livelihood. So as an agenda, it is there. It is its own challenges. It has been affected by the conflict, and that's what I can be able to say on terms of the security sector reform within the country. Concerning, there was a hypothetical question raised that if the dry season comes, then we are likely to see the escalation in terms of fighting. This is, of course, what people believe, probably based on previous experience when the SPLA was fighting the government in Khartoum, and that was the pattern that occurred. Now the question is, will this pattern repeat itself with the current ongoing crisis? The answer can be yes or no. But personally, I believe that, first of all, both parties are under intense pressure from the international community, particularly the US government, what they call the Troika countries, which includes the UK, Norway, and others. There's pressure on both sides to ensure that peace prevails in South Sudan. We have the Intergovernmental Authority, that's the IGAD in the region, which is brokering this peace agreement. There's also pressure on that. And there's pressure also coming from the population within South Sudan, civil society organization, and even the internal displaced people. Everybody would like to go home and settle and start a new life. So I believe that with this pressure, the likelihood that the dry season will see a pickup in the fighting is unlikely to happen. But that does not mean that there will be no skirmishes here and there as the negotiation continue. There are threats of sanctions. We have seen already some military generals have been already sanctioned by I think the EU and the US government, and there's a very high threat that if the parties to the conflict do not really agree to see that peace prevails, it's likely that sanctions could be applied across. But the question would be whether these sanctions would be could result into escalating the war or reduce it is also something that is debatable. But what I can say is the pressure is mounting, and we as South Sudanese, we want peace. The international community wants to see that peace is there so that people can start a fresh life. So that is a hypothetical question that will need to be proven when we are there in the dry season, which is not far from now. This is in October, maybe in the next 2 months, we will be there and we will see what actually happens during that period of time. But for personally, I believe that it is unlikely that it will escalate, but violations and so on probably would be there. And this is simply due to the fact that there's quite a lot of pressure, and there's even a threat of an arms embargo on both sides of the conflict. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, John. I think we have time for at least one more question. Let's hear from another national society. Andreas, would you like to pose a question? Yeah, about 3 minutes left, so just enough time for one more, and then lunch.
Yes, hello. This is Andreas from Danish Red Cross. So obviously I might speak with a bit of a bias, being a member of the family. But I think this is just as much as a challenge, sort of a challenge to people in the room, because one of the things we've been seeing for the past 2 days is that local actors are not involved enough. We are not investing enough in local capacities. The World Humanitarian Summit consultations show that local actors find the UN system poorly accessible. So my question is maybe not so much to you, but more to the room. How are we actually investing in local capacities? Is that something we're doing enough? Is it sustainable? Very often we move in, we quickly do a lot of things, but we leave again very quickly as well. And I think the Red Cross societies are some of the only ones that are actually staying there before, during, and after. So I think this is also maybe very much a challenge to those organizations that come in, but also leave again. Is this really following the conclusions of the past 2 days of discussions emphasizing local capacities? Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. Any last thoughts or reactions on that? On this question. Any question you like, or any last words before we break?
Maybe on what Andrea just said is indeed, inside the movement, we really try to put a lot of effort in order to build the capacity of the national society. So it's not only the ICRC, it's also the other national societies that are present in South Sudan, that trying to support the national society in being there, in maintaining their work, in being able to work across the country, and enhancing the capacities in order to address the victims and make a difference for their lives, and trying to, so in the long term, do in a way that, yes, I mean, more and more work will be able to be absorbed by the national society itself.
Yeah, what I can compliment on that is that I think the Red Cross globally sets a good example of how local capacity can be built. And if you look across the globe, you find that the Red Cross network is all over. And when we have our international partners coming into the country, ICRC, Federation, other participating national society, one of the components that is put is to build a local capacity and network. And when they leave, still the local Red Cross is able to perform and operate. And this is not the case we see with the other humanitarian actors. For example, now in South Sudan, according to the government, there are over 250 international organizations, and these organizations are each working on their own without partners locally. So the day they will exit the country, there will be no any capacity that they will leave behind in terms of local organizations that they have been working with. Probably the capacity would be with the individuals that have been working with them, and these individuals could be absorbed either to the government or other institutions. But as local institutions that will continue to work and address the humanitarian challenges and issues, that is completely not there. And I think the Red Cross is a good example for others to learn from and use this as a future model of how to build networks and local capacities, not necessarily in South Sudan, but wherever there may be crisis around the globe. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And just to add to that, I think that the other thing that we can potentially learn from this example of partnership is indeed how partnership can be built on the basis of comparative advantage. So many times we see that partnerships are more extractive relationships or subcontracted relationships as opposed to a genuine strategic partnership that builds on the strengths and comparative advantage of each partner. So a great deal more that could be learned, I think, by studying the Red Cross movement. Please join me in thanking this panel. A very, very interesting case study.